Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Network Insights. This series from Move Consulting does exactly what it says on the tin. It's an opportunity for us to speak to the amazing people that make up our network and share some of the insights and expertise that they hold. And I'm delighted that today's theme will focus around the importance of insight. So, Elaine, over to you to introduce our guest for today.
Well, our amazing person this morning is Damian Stevenson, and Damian is the director of DS Insight and also my former boss as well, actually, at Swim England. So welcome, Damian. It's good to speak to you again.
Brilliant to be here. Thanks, Elaine. Thanks, Craig.
Not a problem at all. So, as mentioned, the theme for today's conversation is around the importance of insight. So one of the best places to start is always at the beginning. What do we mean, Damian, when we talk about insight? Are there any key things that you would want people to understand and know?
Yeah, absolutely. Good starting question, really. I would say it's about going on a bit of a journey of understanding. A lot of organizations tend to sort of think of insight as either a more expensive form of research or, a slightly higher day rate. Actually, for me, insight is about collection of data and the interpretation of it to inform ultimately good quality decision making at the heart of organizations. So if in a nutshell, it's using whatever data collection techniques you have. It could be surveys, it could be qualitative research, could be desk research, could be social media trends, could be anything that you think is relevant, but ultimately through a process of shaping that data in context of your business and interpreting it, that should give you the insights to answer your business questions and inform your strategy.
Right, okay. And is there a difference between those two? You alluded to one before in terms of the research element of it. What is that difference between? Because I often hear those phrases, and I'm sure others may as well, of research and insight. Is it not all just the same thing? Where does one start and the other one begin? Anything to add on there?
Yeah, I mean, having been a research manager in some roles earlier in my career and then a head of insight, I suppose it's a good starting point is research manager. You manage a lot of research projects. So whether that's sort of survey projects, whether that's qualitative focus groups or depth interviews and looking at the differences there. Insight is combining all of the information from that research with other contextual information as well. So it goes through, if you like, capturing data, weaving it together as information that might be of use, whether that's statistics or verbatim comments, and then thinking about actually the insights piece is the so what. So what do we do differently or continue the same as a result of this new information? And so it's thinking about recommendations. And then ultimately, the next step beyond insight is how do you develop actions on the back of it so they're insight led? And hopefully we'll talk about a little bit more about that in the next few minutes.
Great, thank you, Damian. I mean, you've talked quite a lot there in terms of how you can use insight and how it can help shape things. Can you give us some examples of where you've seen that done really well, and maybe some examples of work that been involved in the past, on that and how it's made a difference?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I'll start a little bit earlier than when we worked together, Elaine, at Swim England, and then I'll come on to some of the work that we did together. For me, Nottingham Trent University was a good starting point. I was the head of market intelligence and research, which ended up being head of insight eventually when we knew what we were doing in terms of the insight piece. And what we did was, before the national student survey had been developed, we started our own student survey and qualitative research program. And at the heart of it was understanding how our students felt about the student experience. And it led to all sorts of innovative developments on the back of it. So being able to highlight, if you like, how people, the students on different campuses, because Nottingham Trent is based in 3 places, and how students on the smaller campuses felt slightly alienated from the main city centre campus, led to a lot of investment in transport links, better transport links between the campuses. Likewise, when we started unpicking the course information and applications by course, and that was using UCAS data that was widely available at the time, we put that into a sophisticated analysis tool, and the insights from that, the interpretation of that data, helped us work with the academic colleges across Nottingham Trent University to think about actually the course portfolio. Is that fit for purpose? Or if we're looking at, whether it's going up the league tables, whether it's increasing applications, and whether it's being more relevant to the skills requirements of modern society, actually, what sorts of courses do we need to put on as a modern post-92 university? And so in that regard, what was really empowering to me, because it was my first sort of managerial role, managing a small team that we developed and nurtured, and that are now leading it themselves. Really important in terms of the so what. So why are we investing in this new team? From an academic perspective, as you know, research is essentially PhDs, it's publications and dissertations and so forth. It wasn't really considered relevant in terms of market research. And what we were doing, whether it was through the data or the and the analysis of that data, or whether it was through new innovative research projects, was really informing decisions for the senior management team and board to empower those decisions through evidence in a way that maybe hadn't been done in the past. So hopefully that's a good relevant example.
And if we move on to the work that we did at Swim England, I mean, I know from practical example, and I have to say, when I moved into Swim England, it was, having worked in other bodies, it was very unusual for a governing body of sport to have insight at the heart of what they were doing. And for me, we're coming in to design a program, the Water Wellbeing Program, having access to that data interpreted for me to be able to tell me what people with long-term health conditions were wanting when it came to getting into the water was absolutely amazing. I mean, I felt very privileged to have access to all of that information. So I don't know obviously it informed other programs at Swim England. Do you want to share a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, thanks, Elaine. Well, I guess that's one of the reasons that we're still talking, isn't it? That you listened, which is always the benefit from a stakeholder perspective. I think the research that we did at Swim England, I look back on incredibly fondly because it was a real game changer for the industry. So we did a multi-stage research project, which was quantitative, qualitative, thousands of interviews by survey, but also getting under the bonnet and working with some cracking agencies, including behavioural architects, who essentially used a behavioural science framework to understand what were the barriers and possibilities of influencing and informing good or great quality customer experiences across the aquatic sector. And this had never really been done before, so it felt like a bit of a game changer. We learnt a lot on that process. For me, I'm not a behavioural science expert. That's why we commissioned the agency and brought them in. What was really interesting was starting to understand and develop with them that framework of what we call the 3 frontier model, a way of breaking down into manageable chunks the whole customer experience in aquatics. And very simply, the first frontier was focused on the visibility and salience of swimming in communities up and down the country. And essentially that means, the cut through is swimming front of mind. Well, no, it's quite a recessive sport in a way. It's hidden away in community buildings, in leisure centres, and people aren't primed to go swimming in the same way that they're primed to see cycling or running here, there, and everywhere. Football is just everywhere, isn't it? Especially at the moment with the Euros on, and other sports do very well throughout the year as well, such as rugby, maybe Formula One, other things. But ultimately, swimming is, it's reliant on either the Commonwealth Games or the things like the Tokyo Games coming up for that massive hit of publicity where it does end up on the back pages, where it feels like more people are swimming because maybe there's more in open water, and inevitably there's the increase in amount of swimming in the warmer months as we tend towards the beaches and open water venues. So the first frontier was, well, actually, how do you engage the community? What are the solutions to really reaching out? And rather than hoping that people come into the pool, actually talking to them about why swimming could be for them. And that's whether it's about the mental health benefits, whether it's about the community, the social side of things, swimming together, and a little bit of commitment bias, going with a friend or whatever. It was all those sort of potential hooks that could be used to really attract people into the pool in the first place. The second, sorry
to jump in there, Damian. That really ties in well with the approach that we take in terms of supporting clients or organisations to design effective programs. So there's the use of insight to understand the needs of our prospective audience or our existing customers.
Yeah.
And then in relation to that first frontier, we consider the elements of whether people feel that the opportunity is there to engage. So there's both the social opportunity side of it. Is this seen as a thing that is done? Are there opportunities physically for me to actually access a pool locally? And like you're saying, it's using the broader kind of awareness that's driven by these major events, and how can you hook that into what you're doing in order to increase that salience? Yeah. So go on to frontier 2. I'm sure you were about to.
Yeah, no, it's good of you to mention. The frontier 2 was really, if frontier 1 is bringing people into the space, the physical environment that you want them to be in. Frontier 2 is about the welcome. It might even be about the ease of parking or accessing, from public transport. But then it's really into the welcome at the front of house and the foyer. It's the route through, the journey through to the pool, through the changing rooms, etc. So it's making sure that the signage and the physical environment is as welcoming as possible. And clearly the staff, the workforce, are fundamental to that. And some of the things that we found were around just the proactive nature of asking people if they're okay when you're walking past them in the corridor as a member of staff, rather than just walking past them and waiting for them to ask you if they're okay. It just changes the dynamic. And one of the biggest pieces of, if you like, we talked about insight earlier, a massive piece of insight was actually poolside hooks and how that can change the whole environment and the whole perception of the swimming experience. Why poolside hooks? Well, it means you've got permission to take a towel or a dressing gown to poolside. So immediately there isn't necessarily what some people were saying, it could feel like a walk of shame between the edge of the changing room and the poolside. And that's where every time I was presenting this, and goodness knows I did it a lot when I was at Swim England, you'd sort of have those moments, those eureka moments when you're talking to people and they go, oh right, yeah, I didn't realize. That's when it feels like an insight, when you're actually changing people's perceptions and you can see them thinking, yeah, we need to maybe get the poolside hooks in, but do things differently as a result of the data, the information, and what you've provided them with.
That's another great example there, because one of the potential kind of oversights that we often make is when people have come through whether it be a physical or a metaphorical door, they're in our space as a provider, a service provider, or even an individual coach. We assume that decision's been made, they're there, we've got them. But the truth often is they've maybe been convinced. I always use the phrase that the first time somebody turns up is because somebody told them to. Could be a poster with a call to action, could be a friend bringing them along. But in that first 2 visits, those first 3-4 hours over a number of visits, this would be, they're probably potentially looking for the excuse, the reason why, no, it's not for me, I'm off. So seeing that hook, using that insight to know that that's a potential kind of trip hazard, if we call it that, for them, is really, really key. And it does have a real impact. This kind of big, almost theoretical concept of insight drills all the way down to putting a hook on a wall, which actually makes a difference. So it's so important, isn't it?
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's interesting as well, because there's the research that Sport England did trying to understand some of the how to engage inactive people, said that actually the barriers and facilitators for those who are active are not dissimilar, but the inactive person will give up the first barrier that they hit, whereas that person that wants to be active will find a way around it. And so those little trips along the way are absolutely vital to be smoothed out if you're going to really target and get to people who really find being active challenging.
Absolutely.
And I know when obviously we went on to convert this into a sort of toolkit in Swim England, which was an audit tool that we did training with some of the pools. And what was really interesting, it was all these things that because the individuals who work in these places tend to have been active themselves, and so for them, actually trying to put themselves in the shoes of somebody who's got a health condition and for whom these trips are a massive thing. So, for example, we did some work in one of the places, and the car parking was a real challenge. I mean, where do you park? And when you get to the front, where's the disabled access? It's not signposted. And there was a bit of it like, well, we don't own the car parks. Yes, but it's impacting on people coming to your building. You need to find a way of sorting this out. So it's interesting to look at, well, here are the issues. How do you work your way through the solutions for it?
Oh, definitely. And I think with swimming, more than probably most in terms of physical activity journeys, you've got more hurdles, haven't you? You've got more opportunity, more friction points, as we used to call them, in terms of where people might just actually, do you know what? It's too much effort, whether that's on the couch thinking about packing your bag ready for going swimming early the next morning, or like you say, it could be the car park, it could be just, is the session that happens in the pool right for me? And that was in Captain Kirk's terms, the final frontier. That it was all about what happens in the pool. What are you offering people? And really powerfully from the research, some of the insights were around, well, swimming can be seen as very two-dimensional. It's either lessons, so you're learning and getting up to the skills, or it's lanes and you're using the skills, but again, in a very one-dimensional way. And actually, on that sort of almost blank canvas of a pool, there are many, many things that you can do, whether that's, and I'm not going to list them all, but aqua classes or other ways like we did with the Disney family fun sessions. There's lots of things that we look to do, and water well-being that we worked through with you and the team, Elaine, was a fantastic example of using the insights and shaping a program, a full customer journey through those 3 frontiers, with the customer at the heart. So and it
allowed us to design the tools as well to sit behind it. So as a result of the insight, we designed, we worked with the Activity Alliance to adapt their training for customer service, to broaden it for people with health conditions. We developed the aquatic activity for health qualifications for exercise referral instructors, so that they knew how to deliver an offer in the pool. And we did the audit tool, obviously, to look at the building design and how you can shape. And it was often very little things that made massive difference, like just changing signposting. Absolutely huge difference. There was lots of learning that had come out from dementia-friendly swimming as part of that. But how about how you use some of the work that you're doing now, Damian, in terms of, I know that you've got some really interesting pieces of work on the go at the moment. How is Insight shaping some of those?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. There's 2 significant clients that I've had since setting up DS Insight. One is Volleyball England, and that's probably a really good example in the context of our conversation, where I've developed an insight strategy or framework that it's the interpretation of their overall strategy. So they launched the game plan in September last year, 2020, and are now focused on, right, okay, what evidence do we need? What data, what insights do we need to inform our decision making, to define and measure our performance in delivering that strategy? And so what I've done is sort of create that insight strategy and then a 2-year program underneath that strategy that is, these are the sorts of projects that you need to do. Just created a sort of a 1-page summary of those projects for them, so that whether they do them or whether they shuffle the pack in terms of the recommended timings, it's a really, hopefully, a good starting point to say, yeah, we need this information. This helps us in terms of the KPIs that we've jointly created to define our performance. And within that, there's a whole lot of work that I'm still working with them on in terms of implementation as well. So it's lovely to be sort of seeing that process through to completion.
Damian, in terms of, we've spoken about, obviously, through the examples so far, that Insights played a role with Volleyball England in supporting the development of their strategy. It can play a role, as you've seen through the Swim England examples, in terms of service and programme design, and it can have an impact on the individual. So it runs all the way through as kind of a golden thread, doesn't it? In terms of, for those that might be listening and maybe hearing or making assumptions, when can or when should we start on that journey of commissioning some research, developing some insights? Is it something that only can be done at the very start? What if I've got a program that's been running for 6 years and it's working well? I would just like to know what better looks like. Can this process help, or do I need to stop and start again? What would your kind of advice or some of the fundamental things to be thinking about and considering be?
Okay, no, it's a good question, Craig. I think for me, yes, it can happen at any time. Notwithstanding budgets and resource capabilities, if it's in-house as well. But I think it's more sort of asking the question, what next? So why do you want to use the research? And this is the starting point. I think what's been interesting in the work with Volleyball England and throughout my career is, if you haven't got your processes correct to enable the generation of research or creation of research and the generation of insights, then very quickly you will undermine all of the good intentions that you and other colleagues might have. And it's quite difficult nowadays, because it's very easy to do a survey. Anyone can create a survey, launch it, and we've got some data, right? That tells us what we need to do about, in your example, the program that you've been running for 6 years. What I've done with Volleyball England and other clients is actually say, right, we need to develop an insight ethos, which is a culture of support across the organization. And often, and in my experience, it's been much, much easier to have a positive impact with support at the senior level and from industry stakeholders. So Swim England, for instance, in that instance, they don't own any swimming pools. So your insight, your capabilities need to be really, really good to influence what is a very fragmented market of leisure centre operators, local authorities who are running pools, or even swim schools and providers separate to that. And I think that, often it's sort of neglected because we go to the quick wins with the easy focus group or stakeholder consultation, or the quick survey on whichever platform you want to use, without thinking first about, well, how does this align to our strategy? Once we know how it aligns to our strategy and what decisions are possible on the back of this research, then we know that we've got a basis for the work. We know that we haven't already made our decision, so we're not sort of being ushered down a certain pathway, if you like, in terms of what good looks like, but we're open to actually learning as a result of this process. And sorry,
Damon, sorry to cut across you. I was just thinking about what you were saying, because I think the industry has been really, really good at customer satisfaction surveys, but they're not being so good at non-customers. So trying to find out, we know about the people who are coming to us, and we had the same experience with exercise referral. You know, the real challenge of implementing a randomized controlled trial was the instructors knew about the people that were coming to them, and they were coming back, so they thought everything was hunky-dory, understandably, but they missed out on the people who either didn't turn up through the front door in the first place, weren't interested, came and then disappeared. So is that element is equally important, really.
Oh, absolutely. And that is relevant to both examples, or two of the examples I've talked about on, during this call. At Nottingham Trent University, often, large numbers for any university will apply, large numbers of potential students will apply every year and not come through, and talking to them and understanding why they ended up choosing their final university is just as important as welcoming in the students who have come through, have chosen you, got the offer and the grades and all the rest of it. Understanding what you could have done differently is incredibly important, whether that's, your marketing collateral and your prospectus, whether that's open days, whether that's the website, or the people that are facilitating all of those. And likewise with Swim England, and one of the projects that we did quite early on was a lapsed member survey to understand, well, hold on, why are people leaving us? And we could look at the data and see, well, actually, is that the arc of, as you go through puberty and into A-level or GCSEs and A-levels, there was a bit of a drop off of the membership. But actually talking to people and understanding, actually, testing some of those hypotheses that we developed and shaped in the data, there's no substitute for it. And it empowered us to do a lot more in terms of, maybe encouraging and improving our membership experiences there.
Yeah, you mentioned those keywords right at the start of the conversation of the quantitative element and the qualitative element of your research, and that's the importance, isn't it? Because the data can sometimes lead you down a path, and it's when you marry that up with the detailed conversations to understand the why. That's what I seem to be hearing quite kind of strongly through this, is that insight helps you answer that question. We're doing this, why? Because, and it's that concept and process of logic modeling that some might have understood. We use that a lot in terms of the program design that we have. It's where are we starting from, where would we like to get to, and reverse engineering almost those steps. And you can only do that with insight. I would assume is going to be a yes to an answer there.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, I agree. And it just reminds me of I've had across my career lots of debrief presentations, and you sort of, I always build them up as a big thing, as make or break, and hopefully it goes well, and myself or the agency, if we've commissioned a research agency, will do the project justice. And often you will get, regardless of how it goes, people in the audience going, well, that's just told me what I already knew. And that's fine. And to begin with, I always saw that as a criticism and took it almost personally to heart. But actually, you know what, that's part of the process, isn't it? And actually, there's nothing wrong with confirming intuition. Often our guts are right. And we've got to where we are in life for a reason, because our guts are often right. And you test that. You test different perspectives within the research in a way that is robust and ultimately gets everyone on the same page in that debrief.
Yeah. There's no issue in my mind. To use an analogy from somewhere different, one of my friends is an English teacher. He loves reading books, and we were having dinner outside, socially distanced, last week, and we were talking about what are our achievements that we're proud of over lockdown. And one of the things that he mentioned was he's read War and Peace, my friend Ian. Hi, Ian, if you're watching. And he really passionately went into telling us about the book. And it's actually better than people say that it is. It's known for being long and what have you. But he shared with me, complete news to me, that they rewrite the same novel from the original every general generation, every 15, maybe short of 10 years, something like that. And it's because language changes. So the meaning of a word from the original text means something completely different in today.
Right.
And in 1990, that same word meant something different even between 2021 and 1990. So completing some research that's already been done and somebody telling you, well, I already knew that, is great, because it means that that insight hasn't changed. That's still the same. But I'm sure that's a key part to it, isn't it? You can ask a sample of people and they can give you different insights. You can generate a different understanding from a different audience. So
yeah, and I think for me, when someone says that, whereas before I'd be sort of reflecting and almost see it as a negative, nowadays it's just well, that's great. What are you going to do as a result of it, confirming your intuition? And for me, presentations are great, and we all love PowerPoint, and we've used it for years, but it's the facilitated workshops around the presentations that are where, and I remember doing this with Elaine and the team. It brings it to life, and the so what is. So ultimately, whether you're developing programs or whether it's training approaches for workforce, how are you utilizing that? If it's new knowledge or confirming hunches and intuition, how are you using that, and how is that informing your action planning going forwards? I think is always where I want to drive the conversation towards.
Yeah. So thanks so much so far for everything that we've discussed and gone through. Here's a challenge for you. If somebody is thinking, right, this insight game, we've not done it before, we now appreciate that it's an important thing to do. What's one of the first things that I should be thinking about or maybe doing, just in real simple terms, to get me off the ground?
Okay. I mean, obviously, call me, have a conversation, and we'll be able to explore it. But in real terms, I think it's just assess where you are, assess why you're now thinking of insight as being the solution. You'll probably be right. I mean, it would be foolish for me to say otherwise. But ultimately, you'll have got so far as an organization with either, I guess, a sense of some research and data, and you might be doing it to a reasonable level. Have you looked at it as an insight program, and have you looked at it in terms of really taking it to the next level to inform your decision making at all levels? Because if you haven't, then that's the opportunity. There's a huge gap in knowledge, if you like, for organizations who are just collecting data. And some of the organizations I've worked for and that have been mentioned on the call were at that point when I joined them. They had a lot of data of stuff. They didn't know what to do with it necessarily. They didn't know how to use that to inform decision making. So I think one of the first things that I did with Volleyball England was get under the bonnet and assess what they collect. What information, what research do you do, and how is it used? And that goes right back to that insight ethos, developing the culture, where actually as a senior leadership team, if you do this right, it will put more pressure on you because actually there's more accountability. But that's where you need to be as a senior leadership team. It's okay collecting stuff that you want to collect or are in a position to collect and reporting that back. But is that the right stuff that really defines success for your strategy? I guess that's where I'd start.
For me as well, there's that whole element of using your resources more effectively, because you've got there's a lot of people out there delivering, and what really struck me was I was more confident about what I was going to deliver and who I needed in the team and how they were going to work, because sitting behind that was this knowledge of these are the people we're trying to support and this is what they need to make it work. So I think there's a massive potential for saving time and money, even ultimately, to be able to say, actually, we're more reassured that what we're going to do is going to work at the end of the day. And then afterwards, we can collect, because we understand what it is we're trying to change, we can collect the right information to show that that is the case. So for me, that was really massive difference.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Well, Damian, thank you so much for being part of this episode of Network Insights and helping us to understand the importance of insight. As you may know, DS Insight, Damian is an associate partner to Move Consulting. So between the three of us now, we hope that we can offer that opportunity to support you in your program design or service design and delivery to understand the what and to take it through into that so what and action some of those insights that we've spoken about being so important. If you are interested to get involved in the conversation, please do comment below this video, like and share it across your network so we can share these insights that Damian shared with us across as broad an audience as we can. And we'll look forward to welcoming you to episode 3 coming soon.